Alrighty, I hope everybody's ready for an exciting video because today we're going to be talking about numbers.
You want the numbers, Mason. That's all we've ever wanted.
Alrighty guys, if you're new here, go ahead and hit the bell notification icon and the subscribe button so that you can see when new videos come out. If you're not new here, then you already know the next thing we're going to be doing is the fan art section. So first we have a Lollipop Suris by Bumblin' Bee, and then we have a Minimalistic Suris by Heatap.
I'd kill for a Heatap!
Oh, Jesus!
No, actually, it's Goku.
And then finally, by Dog, we have a Dabbing Suris. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions, and let's get into the actual topic of the video, numbers, and how do we actually calculate a living wage? Now, why are we actually talking about a living wage? Well, the purpose of a minimum wage here in the United States is to actually create a living base wage that people can utilize. To pull from an overview of the Fair Labor Standards Act, the purpose of the minimum wage is to stabilize the post-depression economy to protect workers in the labor force. The minimum wage is designed to create a minimum standard of living to protect the health and well-being of employees. Note that you can actually use that quote that I pulled from the Fair Labor Standards Act in order to refute anybody that tries to tell you that the minimum wage is supposed to be for right out of high school unskilled labor. No. Minimum wage is supposed to provide you the minimums required to live a comfortable life. Now, what that actually means is going to be dependent on where you happen to live, at least here in the United States. So I'm going to go ahead and take the average cost of things in my home area of Georgia. I'm going to be doing these estimates off of a two-family household that is looking to raise a child, at least one child. This household only has one vehicle, but has two phones. If you don't think that a household like that might exist, then hi, I effectively live in that kind of household. Okay, let's go ahead and take the math of 40 hours a week for work, and let's go ahead and say that that's for 4 weeks of work. This way, in case you happen to have a half week in there at some point, but you have to take a sick day, that's accounted for. So Georgia sets its minimum wage to $5.15 an hour, but because the federal minimum wage is higher, we have to go with $7.25 an hour. That means that before taxes, you would be making $1,160 a month. Now, this is before your taxes are taken into account, but for the sake of making this math easy, we're not going to account for that. But here in Georgia, if you were making minimum wage, you would be in the 12% tax bracket. So you can figure out that math on your own if you want to. All right, so next we need to figure out what is the average cost of rent here in Georgia. Typically for a two-bedroom, it's $762, but in most areas where I happen to be, it's closer to $900. But for the sake of argument, we'll go ahead and lowball it to the $762 figure. Now, you may be asking yourself, why a two-bedroom apartment? And the reason for that is pretty clear. If it is a couple that has the potential to have a child, then they need to have a private room for that child, so this accounts for that. Next, we're going to go ahead and calculate phone bill. This is for two people who happen to be paying off their phones and also have unlimited data and everything else. That ends up being about $150. Technically, we pay more for ours, but let's go ahead and lowball that as well. Now, the number we're going to be using for internet is going to be based off of after first-year promotions. If you've ever gotten internet in an area, usually they have first-year promotions that lower the cost of your internet significantly. After that, though, it generally costs you about $70 to $100. We're going to go ahead and go with the $100 figure because, well, that's what we pay. Next, we're going to talk about the grocery bill. This is going to be anywhere between $500 and $700, and that number is significantly higher than what most people probably pay for groceries because we're including things like replacements for clothes, replacements for work shoes, replacements for things around the house that happen to break like light bulbs, anything that you would need to pick up in the grocery store that are your everyday commodities that need replacing over and above food. These next ones are going to be pretty standard. We're going to go ahead and calculate about $150 for power, about $50 for water, probably about $80 on gas if you need it, and about $140 on fuel. I'm using gas as in propane and fuel as in the fuel for your car to get you to work. Now we're going to go ahead and factor in a car payment. Some people actually own their vehicles, but not everybody has the ability to buy a vehicle outright. So an average car payment can be about $200 to $300 a month, and if you have that kind of car payment, you probably have about $200 in insurance per month because you can't get state minimum. So we'll go ahead and calculate car payments at about $500 a month total. Now we're going to go ahead and have a small $50 budget set up for subscriptions. This is going to be stuff like Amazon Prime, Netflix, and one more subscription like, say, Humble Bundle or something like that, so that you can get games and entertainment on the cheap. You do need recreation over and above simply living and subsisting. Now, the next fund is going to be your health insurance. You desperately need health insurance, and here in the United States, we don't have a public option, at least not an effective one. So let's go ahead and say that's going to be between $100 and $150. I'm sure yours is probably more, but even if we're working with low numbers, you'll see what the end result turns out to be. Now, let's say that you wanted to get an education, so your student loans are going to factor into this. That can be anywhere between $200 to $500 a month. Let's go ahead and cut the average there and just say $350 a month. Now, if you look at my copy-pasted calculator on screen, you'll see that we've got $2,996 of living expenses, but we're not done. There's two other small expenses that we need to take into account: a savings account and a slush fund. So your savings account. This is something that you need in order to protect yourself from whatever life happens to throw at you. A family member might die, you might get into a car crash, you might have a big medical expense, or you might get fired from a job and need to subsist for a while. So let's go ahead and say that 10% of whatever you earn needs to go into savings. So we're going to go ahead and take 10% of our living expenses and just call that a savings expense. So now that we've got about $290 going into a savings account, let's go ahead and cut that in half for our slush fund. The slush fund is going to be used so that we can buy ourselves entertainment, go to the movies, treat ourselves every now and again to make sure that we can actually, stay sane. $150 for a slush fund is really only going to allow us to go out maybe once or twice a month. So, do you have all that in your head? Probably not, but don't worry. I'm going to go ahead and put the final number on screen. That is $3,436 are needed for a basic living expense that covers everything. Now, that number is much higher than the federal minimum wage number we worked with before, but let's go ahead and do the math to see what this would look like as an hourly rate. And doing the math for it, we find that it comes out to about $21.50 an hour. That would actually be considered a fully functional living wage for an American citizen living in North Georgia. Now, I know there's been conversation for years here in the United States about a $15 an hour minimum wage, and hopefully through this math you can see that for some areas, a $15 an hour minimum wage isn't actually even enough. Now note that these are base numbers for living comfortably, and they only take into account about $300 a month in order to replace anything like a computer or a car or something like that that might break. You might not necessarily be able to actually take care of everything that comes up. You have a plumbing issue, might not be able to take care of that. You end up having some issue with your vehicle, you might not be able to take care of that. You have a medical expense, you might be paying monthly into that for a while. Now, some of you might say, well, what if I don't have student loans? What if I just end up getting a job in a trade and going that way? Well, then your number looks more like this. You would need to make $19 an hour to survive. I know a lot of you are probably bored with the number dumping, so what's the point of all this? Why am I trying to throw all these numbers out on the screen? The point of all this is to maybe have a spreadsheet here that people can look at. If you are in a higher economic class and don't know what the numbers actually look like for somebody who is in the lower echelons of society, this is what they look like. People make about a third of what they actually need to survive on minimum wage. And remember, the purpose of minimum wage is to be a living wage. This is not for high schoolers just coming out, unskilled labor, blah, 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 blah. All of that is just fucking propaganda. If you've honestly bought into the idea that somebody working a full-time job does not deserve to have a living wage, then I hope you never actually own a business. The unfortunate truth, however, is that a lot of people who do own businesses do think that the minimum wage is perfectly acceptable for the average worker, and that they can make up for this with overtime. But in a lot of cases, they can't actually make up for this with overtime. And one of the ways that people can try to cut these expenses down in order to actually survive is by coupling their medical expenses with their business. But this leads to another issue. One, if you look at the student loan numbers from before, you'll see that taking a few $100s out of this equation doesn't really make the kind of dent that you think it would. On top of that, if you are in a situation where your employer is holding the ability to take care of you medically over your head, if you happen to be exploited at that job and you happen to be abused or in a hostile work environment, then tough luck. It sucks to be you. You can't legitimately go find a healthier work environment because that work environment might not necessarily take care of your medical expenses. And if you've ever actually been shopping around at jobs in order to get medical insurance, then you know that in a lot of them, you don't get eligible for medical insurance even as a full-timer for at least a few months, if not a year of employment. Some people don't actually have the luxury of taking that amount of time and end up getting stuck in abusive job positions as a result. So, is there a solution to this? There's a few you can engage in, but there's one feasible one. If you have the ability to construct a workers' union or something like that, that's probably a thing you need to engage in. You see, you, as a single employee working minimum wage, have no bargaining power against your boss. You, as a minimum wage employee, are not so much of an asset that your boss can't replace you with another warm body. But several tens of you? Perhaps hundreds of you? That's a lot harder for a boss to replace. You can do things like organize a worker strike and try to bargain for better pay. If you're working at a giant restaurant like McDonald's or working at a retail giant like Walmart, you have the ability to unionize in those locations and gain more collective bargaining power. However, there is another side to this coin. While technically a job is not allowed to prevent you from organizing a union, if you've ever worked at a place like Walmart, there's usually a lot of anti-union propaganda that you're fed in order to even gain the job in the first place. Stuff that de-incentivizes you from getting into a union. And if you happen to be part of a right-to-work state, like where I am, then a company can fire you for any reason. They can't fire you for trying to create a union, but they can find any reason under the sun to fire you, and under whatever reason they decide, they can sever you out. And it's going to be on you to prove that you were fired for trying to start a union, and trust me, there's not going to be an effective paper trail to defend you there. Hell, if we're on the topic of Walmart, Walmart actually employs a system called the D-Day system, where they have a paper trail set up so that if you actually try to file for unemployment, they have the ability to fight against you. In fact, the purpose of the D-Day system, you take 1 day off if you get a sufficient amount of warnings from work. When you take that day off, you have to write a note explaining what you did wrong, why it was wrong, and why Walmart has to actually allow you to continue working, why you are worth their time. They literally make you grovel in order to keep your job. But there's another half to that, another terribly exploitative half. Not only are you basically being humiliated in order to keep your job, that note functions as evidence against you. If you try to file for unemployment and say that you were unrightfully taken out of your job, then Walmart has a piece of paper written by you explaining that it was all your fault. If you didn't write that piece of paper, you had to leave your job. But if you didn't write that piece of paper, then you have to tell the unemployment office that you didn't do the thing Walmart told you to do that would allow you to keep your job. It's a double bind, an abusive catch-22. And they're not the only business that engages in predatory practices like this. Also, as broken as our system is here in the United States, you definitely should also be going out to vote. If a politician happens to be advocating for what you need politically, then there's no reason not to at least try to let your voice be heard that way by voting. It's also definitely not a bad idea to organize your own protests and strikes, as that guarantees that, at least in some capacity, your voice will get heard. Please note, though, unions are not the one-stop shop to everything either. They are a band-aid. A union is an effective way to gain collective bargaining power against a company that has financial power over you. This is not necessarily a one-stop shop. But with all that said, hopefully this video provided a little bit of math to back up how the federal minimum wage that we have right now isn't exactly a living wage. Even though it was meant to be, it's supposed to be, and axiomatically, it should be. But what do you guys think about this? Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know if you think this is a fair system, if you think that this is a system that needs upheaval, or if this is something that we can fix with more band-aids. I would love to see your reasoning in the comment section below. If you've made it to this part of the video, then these are my lovely patrons. These are the people that make videos like this possible because YouTube really doesn't pay me all that much. It doesn't pay most YouTubers all that much. So these guys are directly responsible for allowing me to make videos and send them to you. If you happen to be a patron, then you get videos as soon as they are produced, as opposed to when they are released, so this sometimes can give you an extra day or two before a video comes out. So, if that's a thing that you want to see, then go ahead and head on over to my Patreon and do that. That all said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always everyone, insert end of video tagline here.